Hey class, we are on lesson 60. This is on circles. Thankfully, you have another very simple lesson here. You may already know some of the terminology associated with circles. So this lesson just goes over some language that is used when talking about circles and gives you a few simple formulas that you'll use a lot in math going forward. And so it would be best to just remember them and memorize them. Okay, so starting off, I have 4 terms here on the right-hand side. Okay, chord, radius, diameter, and circumference. What do all those mean? All right, if you like my perfect circle, I finally got smart and copied one off the internet and pasted it in here. Instead of trying to draw my own, I tried once. It was a disaster. Okay, so what is a chord? That's probably something you hear a little less often. Now I have to actually draw and it will be a little sloppier. So a chord is a line that goes from any one point on a circle to another point. So any of these lines would be a chord. Okay, I can go in any direction. Oh, see, there we go, not straight. Chords would be straight lines. Those are not straight lines. Nice thing is I can erase those yellow lines and my circle doesn't go away. So that's what a chord is. It connects any 2 points on the circle, all right? Now, a radius, actually I'm going to skip to diameter next. So from chord to diameter, a diameter is the chord that goes from the center of the circle directly over to the other. So it's from the farthest, it's the longest line in the that you can draw in a circle, from one end to the other. I guess the diameter would go 2 ways. Either of those is a diameter. A diameter is the longest chord, the one that goes through the center, and half of that chord, we take half of it, that's called a radius. So diameter is all the way from one side to the other, and a radius is from the center of the circle out to any point on the edge. Any of these would be a radius, going from the center out to the edge. There's many potential lines that would represent a radius, okay? So the diameter in distance is always going to be exactly twice as much as a radius. The diameter is twice as long as the radius. Now, what is the circumference? The circumference is just the distance around the outside of the circle. When we talk about squares and rectangles and such, we use the term perimeter. But for circles, the perimeter is called the circumference. All right? I'm going to erase all these lines. So some formulas. Some mathematicians once upon a time got interested in how a diameter related to the circumference. Like how many diameters did it take to wrap around the circumference of the circle? Was there any relation between the distance of the diameter and the measurement circumference? Were they related in any way? So some math people, some math minds, took the diameter and they drew, they tried to wrap it around once. I'm going to try to sort of represent the length of that diameter in there. And they wrapped it around twice, and then they wrapped it around a third time. Sorry, it's just messy. That's 3 diameters wrapped around that circle, and they found that you could fit 3 diameters around the circumference with a little bit left over. And that was consistent no matter what size circle you had. Okay, if you had a small one, if you had a really big one, it would be the same thing. The diameter, you could take that diameter and you could wrap it around the circle once, twice, 3 times, and have a little bit left over. Okay, so they wanted to find out how is it related? How could we calculate the circumference if we know the diameter? And they discovered that that diameter would wrap around exactly 3.141529. It's actually a long decimal number, and you'll recognize this, and they call that number pi, because pi is the number that when multiplied by the diameter of a circle gives you the circumference. So to simplify, we typically round the long decimal number pi to 3.14, and we just talk about that. That's close enough for our purposes. So if you took the diameter, let's say the diameter of the circle in the middle here is 8, inches. Then I would take 8 and I would multiply it by 3.14, and I would get the circumference. I'm going to call it capital C. So pi, and then pi is like it's a Greek letter, and it's represented by this thing here, 2 straight lines covered with a top, kind of looks like a table. That's the symbol for pi, and oftentimes in math problems, the book is fine with you just leaving it in terms of pi. So you could say that the circumference of the circle is 8 pi, okay? And I wrote a picture of, that's my rendering of Archimedes down there. Archimedes was a scientist who lived about 300 years before Jesus, and he was a brilliant math mind. And he first came up with or approximated the number pi. Later mathematicians kind of perfected that, but he was the first one. And he had all kinds of inventions, mostly in the mathematical and mechanical realm, or discoveries, I should say, and inventions. So that's how diameter is related to circumference. So now we have our first formula. Circumference is equal to pi times d. Pi times d. And d is diameter. So then they explained kind of how they came up with the formula circumference, and then they right away throw in a formula for area. Don't really talk about how they arrive at it, which tells me it must have been pretty complex. And so you just need to know what the formula is. So we can also calculate the area of a circle. See if I can color this in. Just experimenting. Yeah, there we go. If I shade that in, okay, pretend like it's in the lines. Okay, that represents the area of the circle. It's the area on the inside of the circle, whereas circumference is the distance around the outside of the circle. And they tell us in this math lesson that the formula for the area of any circle is pi times radius squared. So if for this circle here, if our diameter is 8, that means our radius is 4. And we would solve area by saying area is pi times 4 squared, and that's pi times 16. Typically, if you leave pi in an answer, you'd say 16 pi. It doesn't matter a whole bunch, but again, the convention is kind of to put pi last, or you could simply multiply 16 times 3.14. Either would be correct. For the purpose of this class, I'm fine if you leave it in terms of pi, and you leave pi in the answer, and you don't go ahead and multiply 16 by 3.14. That's fine with me. I'm just more interested in knowing that you know the formula, you understand how to solve it. Okay, so we've covered, what have we gone over here? Chord, that's any line that goes from one end of the circle to another, one side of a circle. Sorry, let me rephrase that. A chord is a line that goes from any point on the circumference of a circle to the other. Radius is the distance from the center of the circle out to any point on the edge of the circle. Diameter is the longest chord, goes from one end all the way to the other. It's the longest chord that goes right through the center. And the circumference is the distance around the outside of the circle. And the takeaway that you need for purposes of your math problems, you need to know the formula for circumference, that's pi times d, and you need to know the formula for area, which is pi times radius squared. And your problem set will ask you that. That will be your practice set, I mean. And so you also need to know that the diameter is exactly twice as long as radius. Okay, that information should get you through this math set. Okay, signing off.